Hi there, my name is Tracy Rubel. Welcome to the Sidewalk Talk listener training. I'm going to say a little bit about me because you and I are going to be hanging out for a while. First, I want to say to you, though, thank you. If you were here, I'd probably be tearing up, but I'm talking into a little black box right now. But pretend like I'm actually talking to you. It means a lot. It really means a lot that you're going to do this with us. So stick with me here for about 45 minutes. I'm a therapist. I work in San Francisco, California, in the United States. I work downtown in the financial district. This whole thing started, I actually run a clinic now. It started out as a blog. It turns out I really like to learn and be in community with other therapists. I really like hanging out with therapists. I think they're really cool people. And in the process of writing, we have this writers community and we meet up and we share a listserv and we talk about therapy topics. And I said, hey, I really want to put my chair out on a street. And so Lily Sloan, another therapist who had been writing with Psyched in San Francisco magazine, said, I have been thinking of the same exact thing. So we spent about 9 months dreaming up the concept. And in May of 2015, Lily and I had about 28 volunteers. We were in 13 locations across San Francisco, and we had a lot of press. And that press attention actually is what sort of made this thing grow. We had no intention of growing this thing. It was going to be a one-time project. So that being said, just so you know, I have a full-time psychotherapy practice and run a clinic of 15 psychotherapists. I also run a magazine with about 60 writers. And we have we have 400 volunteers now for Sidewalk Talk. Probably by the time this video goes live, it'll be more. And this is something I do in my spare time. So I appreciate your patience with me as we streamline this process. We really want to make it automated so that as many people can hit the streets and spread this message of the power of listening. So let me say something about why the heck I'm doing this project. Maria Abramovich's piece, The Artist is Present, was the tipping point for me when I saw that documentary and heard about her project. That's what really had me going the step farther of taking this idea that had been burning in my chest for years and just doing it. But here's what I hope. For me, we're trying to simplify the messaging because I fundamentally believe that when us humans feel a sense of belonging, when we feel like we matter, when we feel that there are people interested in us, that actually is a prerequisite for us all being healthy, right? So this isn't about necessarily mental illness. It's about mental health, right? We actually need each other. And so I really want to promote this sense of community responsibility. We are actually all responsible for the health of one another, right? Through the ways that we show up walking down the street. Where is this going to head? So I said originally the intention was not to build this out. Lily has gone on, my co-conspirator. She is producing a podcast, and that was really her passion. So if you want to check that out, it's called A Therapist Walks Into a Bar. I feel really passionate about keeping this alive and keeping it going. I can't say that I totally know where it's going to go. We're hoping that it goes international. We've had some interest, and we're just looking at, there's all these legal pieces and liability stuff, and we're talking that through now. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time, and we'll see where it goes. But I want to say to you, thank you for coming along for the journey. Okay, so here we are, and I want to just review what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to just go over the sign-up process. I'll talk about process of getting started. I'm going to talk about listening, and even though you're a therapist, for those of you that are therapists, sit through it. Don't fast forward. I actually have learned some things humbly that I am really terrible at when it comes to listening, and you'll be surprised. And actually, there's one piece in there that only therapists do badly. The next, we'll talk about actual logistics. We're going to talk about what happens when you're out there, what your responsibility is, and then we're going to talk about what you do after the event. So without further ado, let me start this section with the sign-up process. You are probably already at this video because you completed the sign-up process, but you may not. You may have started watching it because you found it on YouTube or Vimeo. The process is that you need to go to the sidewalksf.com website. If you're in another city, some of our other city leaders have a different sign-up form, and that's fine. But if you haven't been introduced to other city leaders, if you start here, your name will be forwarded to them. So on the volunteer page, there's a form that asks for all your basic information. The one piece that throws folks off is that you do actually have to download and sign a liability release and upload it in the form before you can sign up. So make sure that you go ahead and complete that process. There are some apps. There's Adobe Sign that's free that allows you to sign it really easily, where you don't even have to print it out. And there's also Hello Sign. That's a Google Chrome install that's free. I have it because it lets you sign all kinds of documents right in your email inbox. Then you upload your liability release and click submit. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is you're going to take this training, and step three is you're going to buy your t-shirt. And just so you know, now that we have about 400 volunteers, all of our t-shirts are coming direct from the printer. So they do press runs or print runs every 3 weeks. If you need to get a shirt sooner than that, you'll want to talk to your city leader because they probably have some that they can bring out with them to your listening event, or we also have buttons as backup for that first event. The money from your t-shirt order actually goes directly to Social Good, who is our fiscal sponsor. So when you buy your t-shirt, it's actually a nonprofit donation in a way. It covers the cost of the shirt and the shipping, and then any proceeds go directly to Social Good, who funds us. So your money's going to a good place too. It's not just going to a t-shirt maker who's making a big profit. So you've got the volunteer page that steps you through step one, which is signing up in the liability form, step two, this video to train yourself, and then step three, buying your t-shirt. There are 2 additional steps that we'd love for you to take. The next one is go to the calendar page. Just click on the calendar page at the top, find an event where you want to volunteer. If you don't see one, see if maybe you can find another listener buddy to go out with you and add your own event there. That is a dynamic calendar. I get an email every time somebody inputs an event and I approve it. So just remember that an event is 2 or more people. It does not have to be a big production. So consider going out and listening on your own right now. Let's see. The other piece is we need some more fundraising help. And one of the fun things that we like to do is have you send out a donation request letter, a little note that says, please sponsor me. It's kind of got 2 purposes, and we attach this letter at the bottom of the volunteer page. It's a little PDF document that you can grab and email to all your friends, or you can borrow some of the language to it from it and just put it in an email. But you know what it does is it actually creates more awareness of Sidewalk Talk, even if your friends don't donate any money to sponsor you. It's a really great way to let people know what you're up to and that you're doing this project without sort of feeling weird. It's just sort of an awareness campaign in a way. We are going to be getting corporate sponsors as well so that we can build an organizational infrastructure. While this is really low cost, we're getting to the size where we're going to need someone to actually manage this instead of doing it after hours like I'm doing right now. So that'll be coming. Okay, moving on. Now we're going to talk about the really juicy stuff and the stuff that I'm the most passionate about. We're going to talk about listening. And it's kind of ironic because I'm actually getting a little tired of talking. I'd like to be listening to you rather than talking right now. Okay, so the first step, this is a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how many times people forget to do this. Listening actually requires relaxation. You know, when we're listening, we have to be receptive. And receptivity is a relaxed, open body posture. You know, oftentimes we're doing this kind of, I call it utilitarian listening, where we're listening for the data that we need to get something done, but really deeply listening to someone so that they feel understood. requires that we actually take a big belly breath, okay? And we drop our shoulders almost like you're kind of trying to put them in your back pocket and you're opening your chest. And I do try to remember to breathe down the front of my body because I still want to remember that I'm a self that's completely separate than this other person. So while I'm listening to what's happening for them, I'm not actually jumping inside their skin. And that's how you can do this project without getting overly tired. Sometimes folks that are really empathic can actually jump inside someone's skin in a way and take a lot of that energy home. And so breathing down the front of my body and making sure that I breathe out through the front of my body sort of helps me remember, oh yeah, I'm a separate self here, and everything in here is safe and okay, even if what's happening over there for that person is really intense. That's actually how I keep it. So I sometimes say in my couples therapy sessions, imagine that there's a hula hoop around you. Everything in that hula hoop is yours, okay? And everything for that other person is happening inside their hula hoop. It's not happening inside of yours. So that's just a way to not get so exhausted by listening and actually take a great deal of pleasure from it. I think in this project what I've learned is you are out there on city streets, and it's completely appropriate to relax the other person as well. So we talked about you relaxing. So what are the ways that you build rapport with someone? You smile at them. You make them feel invited. You're warm. You might ask them a question. You know, I'd like to lead sometimes with, so what made you want to stop today? Or I'm so excited to hear your story, or thank you for stopping. Anything that sort of creates that relaxation in them, right? It's usually some kind of gesture of welcoming. Now the sort of nitty gritty, after everybody's relaxed, I want to talk a little bit about what we really mean by compassion. I'm going to look at some of my notes because I've written a bunch of stuff down. Well, this one you probably already know. Maybe you don't. Compassion or empathy is actually quite different than sympathy. And here's the most important part of this project, and psychotherapists, listen up. You are not in a position of power when we're out there listening. We are just humans who have had our own struggles in life. We don't know the answers. We're not any better than the person sitting across from us, and I don't care what walk of life they come from. I want you to find your way to this person and all the ways that they are as human as you are. Okay? And if you can come from that place, you know, Brene Brown has a quote that I love. She said, compassion is something that happens between equals. And we actually have to know all the places inside of ourselves that are filled with light and all the places that are dark, knowing where we have some snaggly parts of ourselves that aren't so great, and integrate them and just know that that's part of what makes us who we are. And what that does is it shapes how we listen, because we tend to be much, much more compassionate, right? So you try this out in your life. What does it mean to actually let go of this? One person is the healer and one person is the wounded person. What if we didn't show up that way in our listening? You know, you might even ask yourself, if you do show up that way, because sometimes I do with my 8-year-old son. He gets really mad at me. Why am I doing that? It's not usually mean, it's usually innocent. I'm uncomfortable with his discomfort. So I'll give him advice. And he hates that. He actually just wants me to listen. He wants me to hear how his feelings are going and what's happening for him. Okay? It's easier to sort of notice that with your kid, but we actually do this all the time out in the real world. We'll give unsolicited advice. And the subtle message is, I don't want to hear about your experience or your inner world. It's inconvenient for me, or I don't want to know about it. And this is the piece that I actually think we need to change. Okay? Let's see, what else do I got going on here? Yeah, it's about them. I'm guilty of this. Sometimes my brain goes, ooh, that happened to me too. And I want to jump in with, you know, the Me Too story. But it's really about them. So as much as you can just sort of calm your mind down, because your mind will want to go there. And that's human. There's nothing wrong with that. But refrain from the temptation of jumping in there with the Me Too, unless you think it will build some more connection. And that takes some practice for those of you that aren't therapists, to make that distinction, when it's okay to kind of have a Me Too moment with them. Usually I'd say refrain from it, okay? Also, they get to drive the topic, not you, unless, there's always a caveat, unless it sort of feels like they need you to ask some questions to build that rapport first, and that's fine. But again, lean in the direction of letting them lead, okay? We tend to want to lead when there's like this silent, pregnant pause, okay? And actually, if you can tolerate your own anxiety in those silent moments, that's where all the magic happens. Just breathe. And really, 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 compassion is about staying in that silence with the posture of curiosity. Can I be curious about this person? Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about 3 more components of listening. I want to talk about silence. I want to talk about your bias as a listener. And I want to talk about how we could actually tolerate being surprised in that moment where we're listening to someone. Okay. So first, there are going to be moments when you're listening and there will be a lull in the conversation when you're sitting across from someone or you're talking to a family member. I can get a little anxious in those moments, and I think many of us can, and then we rush in and maybe take the conversation in a different direction. I think I still do this a lot. But this is a really good practice to slow down enough to trust this other person and trust yourself to really wait. Okay? So if somebody has just had a big emotional experience and there's some silence, or, you can still see the wheels turning inside, just wait. Sometimes they might need a statement from you like, gosh, I can still see your wheels turning there. Sometimes they get anxious when it's silent for too long. But it's a really beautiful thing to practice. And the more comfortable you are in the silence, the more comfortable they will be in the silence. What you'll want to do is practice curiosity. If you stay curious, they won't feel anxious about no words being spoken. And if you stay non-judgmental, okay? Here's a big one. I want to talk about bias, because this is going to come up. You're going to have people in your life. I think one of my favorite things to talk about is politics. And I am from a part of the world where the politics there are very different than my politics. So when I'm talking to friends or family, it can get intense if my listening gets off track. So here's how we can actually be better community members in general, better family members. If we can really commit, really commit to letting go of what we believe, what our stance is, and letting curiosity drive our listening. That receptivity again, when we are really in a listening stance, when we are really interested in listening, we are not focused on proving our point right and their point wrong, which is what happens. Boy, as a couples therapist, this is the land that I live in all day long. Okay? And I'll tell you, listening this way when someone is radically different in their worldviews is a relief, because you don't actually have to fight with them. So don't take this on as how you should be in the world. It's actually better for you. It is a relief to stay curious. Like, oh, okay, so tell me more. Why do you believe that way? How did you arrive there? Or what makes you think that? Or now sometimes people will get defensive when you are curious. So you might say, okay, so it seems like I'm genuinely curious about you right now, and it sounds like maybe you don't trust that. I really genuinely am not interested in one-upping you or being right. So you might have to reassure them. Sometimes you're not genuinely interested though. So you might have to say, gosh, usually what I say to someone in those moments is, I don't feel like I'm committing my full attention to you in the way that I'd like. So I think probably we need to end here. Or I'm not listening the way I'd like. I'm feeling myself kind of shutting down and being defensive. And I literally will say that when I'm listening to someone, because I think that lets them know what's happening here. And I tell them, and I'm not going to move from that place with you because I genuinely want to hear you. Okay. So I actually say stuff like that. Try it out in your own life. I really think the motivating force behind this is it's good for you to listen this way. Okay. And in the project in Sidewalk Talk, I've been confronted on the street about all kinds of different things. And it's taken some practice to respond non-defensively, but I'm getting really, really good at it. And it occurred to me that, wow, everybody could get good at this because it just takes practice. So, something to think about. The next piece is really allowing yourself to be surprised, okay? We don't know what's going to happen when we're listening to people, but I will tell you this. When you actually start showing up with people in your life in a different way and listening with much less bias, with a lot more curiosity, with kind of a slow, relaxed stance in your nervous system, they're going to feel that, okay? And you might be surprised at how much more people begin to open up to you. They might tell you secrets. They might cry. They might tell you about fears. And allow that to be there without fixing it, okay? Really allow yourself to be surprised by all that this person is actually feeling that you didn't have any clue about, okay? Sometimes it's not negative. You know, I have listeners say, oh, what if someone, falls apart? And I said, what if somebody tells you about one of the greatest love stories you've ever heard? Okay, that has happened in this project. And so that's the other piece, is let yourself be surprised by joy. I think there's this idea that listening to other people means that we're going to hear bad stuff. We have to learn to listen to joy too. There's a lot to be said about joy and how to really stay with someone in that experience without moving into that Me Too space, right? What are some of the other things to be surprised, around surprise? I think this goes back to the bias stuff, but you may hear stuff that shocks you. A particular view on the world that you find really disgusting, maybe. And to continue to be curious, It's, I think it's the change agent. If somebody is maybe feeling really aggressive, for example, staying curious about that aggression softens it. But I don't want you to listen because you want it to change. I think you just listen because it's your intention to be curious about someone's experience in that moment. Okay. Okay. Are you guys ready to get a little bit humble? I'm going to talk about some of the things that we do wrong in listening. Not to be a, negative Nelly here, but I'm guilty of all of them. And when I look at this list, it's one of the things that really gets me thinking, because I think about the impact of some of these things. And these are things that therapists do all the time. Okay, quickly from a list, 6 blocks to good listening. When we compare ourselves either positively or negatively to the person that we're listening to, how often do we do that? They look better than me, or I look better than them, or they're smarter than me, or I'm smarter than them. We are not listening then, the minute we're doing that. So that relaxed open body posture, that mind of curiosity, stay in that stance, and comparing won't happen. Rehearsing. I'm going to prepare what I'm going to say next. You know that one already. Mind reading. Therapists do this one a lot. What are they going to say next? And what direction is this conversation going to go? And where does that come from in their background? And I think it's because they have this problem, or they have an anxiety disorder. Okay. Open, curious listening isn't actually analyzing. It is genuinely listening to see if you can hear the person coming through. To get a little woo-woo, it's listening for their soul, for goodness sakes. Really, their heart and soul. Okay. Judging, we talked about that already. Big one. This is along the lines of the Me Too that I'd already mentioned, but identifying. You know, when we overly identify with, oh, that's just like me, or oh, that's just like me, and even if we don't say anything, if everything that the person is actually saying, we're actually relating to something in our own life, we're not actually listening. You know, I mean, sometimes there'll be a link that's uncanny, but there are some people that have this habit of identifying or looking to identify with something that the person is sharing every step of the way. And in psychological training, that's because we have a wish to sort of merge with that person. It's the way that we feel close. But what it does is it doesn't give us enough of an observational distance to really get to know who this person is, because we're infusing it with so much of our own personality and our own material. So it's not listening to over-identify and think that everything that this person is talking about magically relates to you. It doesn't. And then advising. We know this one. So advising sort of communicates, I know better what you need to do with your life than you do. Remember, good listening is about actually trusting this person, that they are their own best advisor. But when we're in the role of actually genuinely conveying curiosity, what we're also conveying is, I trust you. I trust you, right? It's amazing. You know, as a therapist, when I drop my need to advise and I'm a little more patient, I can't tell you how many times inside of a therapist's office, when I wait, the ideas that the client comes up with are way better than anything I would have. Not always, and certainly this is a distinction. Sometimes therapists are in an advisory role, but we're not sitting out listening on the street as therapists. And when we're actually listening to family members or your kids or your friends, I always ask permission first. Do you want some advice here, I say, or do you want some empathy? Okay. Might be a good habit to get into and see how it changes the way you connect. Let me go down another quick list of bad habits. Boy, who doesn't do this one? Trying to listen to more than one conversation at a time. Hello, cell phone, listening, watching TV. I mean, that's you can't, your brain can't do that. If you're attracted to the communicator, that's more about comparing. That has a comparing component if you think they're attractive or unattractive. Not focusing is a bad habit. You know, it's interesting, but if you're not feeling well or you're tired, it's best to beg out of the conversation. Say, you know, I can't give you my undivided attention because I feel terrible. Better than trying to pretend like you're listening. We talked about sympathizing. We talked about bias, judgments. You know, one last piece I'll say is that there's this idea of selective listening and what we listen to. And, you know, we're listening for words, but we're also listening for that person's mood, or not just the content of what they're sharing, but how they're sharing it. It's very different to say, I'm so happy, versus, I'm so happy. Very different, right? But sometimes our own bias will get in the way and we only want to listen to happy. So we won't actually pay attention that the person does not look happy, okay? We want to welcome whatever feelings arise, right? Let yourself be surprised and see if you can stay out of this bad habit loop that some of us get into around our listening. Okay, so that covers it for listening skills. Now let's move on to listening on city streets. First off, if you're going to go out and volunteer, whether it's a small event or a big event, meet up with your listening buddy ahead of time. I have found a direct correlation between the connection that occurs between the listener buddies, you know, the one that's going to be the greeter and the listener and how they change off. If they have met beforehand and have a comfort level with one another, they actually end up doing however you measure better job. They end up having a better time. It ends up being a really connective experience for them. But they also tend to have a more positive vibe that then directly impacts how many people will actually sit down and talk with them. Okay. So whether you meet each other in person ahead of time, some city leaders have in-person training in addition to a video training or an in-person meetup. We're going to try to have regular meetups. Maybe, I don't want to overcommit, but I hope we can maybe do informal meetups once a quarter here in San Francisco, just in general, so that listeners can get to know one another. But that community building really matters. And if you're a psychotherapist or an MFT intern, this is a great way to build your practice in a way that's fun. It's not sort of networking in that traditional way. You're getting to know other therapists, but you're also doing good for the community at the same time. So you can call them on the phone, you can email them, but really get your plan together, coordinate with them. Are you bringing chairs? You know, do you think we are going to need extra sweaters? Things like that. Okay. You might want to go to the volunteer page and print out the listener code of conduct. We actually have all of the sort of things that we've covered in this video printed out in a printout, and it's good to review. Some people actually really like seeing stuff written. Depending on what city you're in, your city leader will provide you some mental health resources for you in your town. You also want to prepare that the night before. So you want to print out a crisis intervention number. So should there be a mental health crisis, you'll want to have some numbers to give referrals to folks. So in San Francisco, we have postcards with a whole bunch of phone numbers on the back of the postcards. Okay, the referrals to both low-fee counseling centers as well as crisis intervention centers, suicide prevention, and sort of specialized services. Okay. Let's talk about the next day. So you have your buddy, you've made this connection with them, you're clear about who one another is, and you are nervous as all get out. Just so you know, I want to prepare you. I still get anxious the night before, more excited now, but the very first time you're going to do it, you're probably going to be a little anxious. So be kind to yourself. Everybody is. I still am. So expect that. And for some of you, the anxiety may come up in some kind of sneaky ways, where you'll come up with a reason why you can't do it at the last minute, or, you know, all the somatic stuff, like you'll get a belly ache, or, oh, I'm too tired. You'll get a big rush of fatigue. Just know that that could be your anxiety. So check it out. You're going to show up at your site. You're going to have a couple chairs. You're going to have some signs, whether they're homemade signs or they're signs that you got from us. You're going to want to have signs in hand. You're going to want to have a pen to write down referral numbers to, and you're going to want to bring as little as possible with you. So if you're going to wear a jacket, put your t-shirt on over your jacket, put your driver's license and credit card in your back pocket and a bottle of water, and that's it. Okay. You don't want to lose track of your stuff and have something stolen, because you are out there on the street in a public setting, unless you're doing this in a small town. Okay. When you set up, I've learned, if you're in larger groups, it seems that if you have a little bit more organization to how you set up the chairs, it looks a little bit more formal. You do need to know that in different cities, there are different public works ordinances that you'll need to check out with your city. In San Francisco, when you're a Sidewalk Talk listener, we are under the Street Performers Act. So if a police officer stops you, you say, we're a street performer. It's a street performance. And then I tell them it's a community listening project. But you may need to check that out with your own city. I say that because as far as setup goes, the sky's kind of the limit. In general, you don't want to block walkways, or you will be asked to move. We've discovered around the city that there are some sidewalks that are actually private, even though we all use them. So that's something you're probably just going to discover along the way. There are some things that are considered landmarks, so you don't want to put signs on landmarks. This was not a Sidewalk Talk volunteer, but another gentleman spray painted footprints and listening messages on city bricks, which are considered historic bricks. So you want to just be mindful if there's anything historic in your town where you're placing items, because you could get in trouble for that. Let's see. So here's what some of our other volunteers have done. They'll bring out a carpet and end tables and tissue boxes and lamps. I mean, some folks really go for it. And if you're in a setting and you're interested in doing that, I say make it your own, right? It's interesting because sometimes that setup feels a little less like I'm being sold something. Okay, so it draws a little more curiosity. I don't do it because I am barting in on the train and I can't carry all that stuff on the train. So I don't do that. But if you've got the energy and the stamina to do all that, go for it. Just make sure that you're not going to get in trouble for it. So some of the feedback we've gotten is try to make your signs kind of spread out on the street so that when people are way far off in the distance, they already are kind of aware of what's coming, so maybe 100 yards down even, or 50 yards down. We purchase on Amazon some huge Post-it notes and stick them to the ground. They don't stay stuck, so we've gotten some complaints. So I usually buy some painter's tape that match the color of the Post-it notes, and I tape them to the sidewalk, because a lot of times people will have their earbuds in. They'll be looking down, and then they can't really avoid the message. So it's almost like a little yellow brick road that starts way, way back and kind of leads them to your listening spot. Okay. You're going to set up the 2 chairs, and they do not need to be fancy chairs. I literally take beach chairs. Sometimes the ones that are really low to the ground feel really casual and comfortable. They are a little harder for folks that are a little bit older to get in and out of. So keep that in mind. Let's see, what else? That's it for setup. You got your shirt, you got your signs, you got your referral numbers, you've got as little stuff as possible, and that's all you need. And your buddy. You need your buddy. So let's move on and let's talk a little bit about roles. Okay, so there are 2 roles when you are out there listening. We have certainly put on big events where we've had as many as 7 volunteers in one location, and you can experiment, okay? There are listeners and there are greeters, okay? Or sometimes referred to as inviters. I like the name greeter a little bit better, okay? We're kind of changing our tune a little bit on these roles, okay? And so you might work with some older Sidewalk Talk volunteers that have taken a different training, and you might say that it's been updated, okay? Let's talk about the greeter role. First of all, the biggest obstacle and the most anxiety-provoking aspect of this project is inviting people to come sit down and talk, okay? And we've had some volunteers get pretty crabby because they were so surprised, or they had an idea in their mind that they were going to have 20 people take them up on their offer. And I think it maybe hurt their feelings a little bit. So I want to set some expectations. The first expectation is you are going to get rejected 10 times more than anybody takes you up on your offer. Okay, especially if you're in a busy city. It might be different if you're in a small town, but if you're in a busy city, it's powerful. But people, they just walk by. What's a successful day? Well, success is all relative, because you got to remember those people walking by are still impacted by the message, especially if they read one of your Post-it notes that you've put on the ground and they can't avoid it. That maybe they'll go home and listen to somebody a little better because you inspired them, even though you don't know that. But what I try to do is keep in mind that if I get 2 people to sit down and talk to me for that 2 hours, I'm stoked. 2, okay? 2 people. You don't know how that's going to trickle out. Now, what's the most that I've had in a day? The most I've had in a day is 7 or 8, okay? So I want to set those expectations and there have been days where not a lot of folks sat, and I'm getting used to being curious about that. I sit in different locations all over San Francisco, from the Tenderloin to the Financial District to the Castro to the Mission, and it's different every day, even in the same location. So it's completely unpredictable. It's not always location specific. You'll want to be mindful about the time you pick. I think we were initially tending to meet from 11:30 to 1:30, but 11:30 are usually the people that are trying to get their lunch early because they have a deadline. So they're like rushing to grab their lunch before the lunch rush and trying to get back to work. So you might play around with the time that you pick. Experiment a little bit. So then what does the greeter do to get people to actually come sit down. Well, there's some disagreement among our listeners about the best approach. So I'm not going to choose for you. I'm just going to say there are two approaches. One is the greeter is just warmly smiling and holding a sign that says free listening or let's talk about anything. It can be a homemade sign, a printed sign. We have printed signs. I do a little both. Sometimes I yell out if there's a big group of people. We are Sidewalk Talk. This is a community listening project. There's no catch. You don't even have to give your name. We're not selling anything. We're not preaching anything. Okay? A lot of folks will think that you're a religious organization, a political organization. Maybe you're asking for money or you're trying to convert someone. So it's a tough job being the greeter. Other times I just stand and smile and say, hey, and I'll walk up to one person that seems receptive. We're just listening to people today. And they might smile and say, oh, okay. Or they'll ask what it's about. Close them on something. So say, hey, even if you don't want to sit down, will you maybe send someone down or tell someone about it? Okay. We have stickers in San Francisco that we give out that says, I agree to put my cell phone down for the rest of the day today and just say hello. So that can be an icebreaker. So the discrepancy is, should you be really loud and boisterous or should you be really reserved and just welcoming? And it's pretty distinct factions here. Some folks say you should absolutely be loud and boisterous, otherwise no one's going to sit down. And other folks say that is completely, looks like somebody who's a canvasser that's trying to hit you up for money for your political campaign, so you should really have a different posture. I actually think that you should do what's authentic to you, right? Where you actually feel the most authentic. And I actually am a little bit different every time. Some days I'm feeling really quiet. And so I say, hi, we're doing a listening project here and there's no catch. Would you be interested in sitting down and telling your story to someone? Other times I'm kind of being really big and yelling it out. I will say this though. You do need to make the distinction if you're going to be big that you are not selling or converting. Okay? You're not selling or converting. So I usually make a little joke and say, we're not selling anything, we're not preaching anything, and you don't even have to give us your name. Okay? When I say that, I have a lot of people come up to me after I say something like that as the greeter and say, what is this about? And then what, if you're not getting anything out of this, why do you do this? Aren't you promoting some company or something? And then I usually respond and say, well, we actually think that by actually listening to members of our community, everybody's a little better, and then I do say I'm a psychotherapist. I think that listening is part of good mental health. And so we're just helping make our community well. Okay. What else is the greeter meant to do? So that's the hardest part of the greeter's job. Okay. The other thing the greeter needs to do is kind of keep an eye on the space. You might have folks that have been standing off in the corner and you can tell that they want to come sit down, but they're too embarrassed. So walk over to them and shake their hand and say, hey, do you want to come sit down? You're also making sure that everybody's safe. I had a situation where someone was eavesdropping and I went and asked the person, I said, hey, even though this is on a city street, would you mind giving the talker and the listener a little more space? Okay, so you might keep your eyes peeled. Some things that don't work as a greeter is to wander too far off from your crew of listeners. I know that it can get so enticing to want to walk around city streets and invite folks. Unless you have two greeters, you should really stick close to home. Also, something I've noticed is when greeters step forward, okay, and approach someone in their space, you got to be really mindful because that can be perceived as threatening, especially for folks that aren't housed, that are living on the street. Forward motion like that, even though your intention is so kind and good, can actually be read as threat. So I actually do think it's good to find a spot, stand in the spot, or you can wander around. But when you're inviting folks in, be mindful about your approach. Don't, follow folks down the street and, because that can sort of border on harassment. And we don't want people to leave with a bad experience, right? If they need to set a boundary and say no, they get to say no, right? So you're keeping the safety, you're inviting, you're making sure that listeners, maybe if you've got folks waiting, keep their commitment to the time limit. So you might tap a listener on the shoulder and say, hey, I've got another talker waiting for you. So when you guys are ready, you usually want to do that when they're right at that sort of 10-minute mark, which is how long we give folks if there's a line. And that's about it. As far as the roles, it's good to predict ahead of time with your partner trading off, because it's a different energy when you're the greeter. It's a big outward pouring of energy, whereas the listening energy is receptive. So you're sitting quietly and relaxed. The greeter role is more outward, and it's not quite so relaxed. It's got a more, even if you're being gentle in your invite, it's still initiating the contact, and that's the piece that can make it a little tiring. Okay, so you're going to want to switch off with your partner. Okay, the listener. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. There are just a few simple rules. One, no eating, no using your cell phone, and no sunglasses. Okay, you're going to want people to see your eyeballs, and I know it's sometimes bright, so try to find a spot where you can put your chair so that the sun isn't shining in your eyes. Wear sunscreen that day. I've been sunburned out there before, not thinking about that. So maybe, you can wear a hat. Maybe we should get some Sidewalk Talk hats. That would be fun. We used to have this stance that as the listener, you should just sit and not invite people, but we're changing our ideas about that. If you're sitting in the chair and there's an empty chair across from you and you make very polite eye contact with somebody, we welcome you to say, hey, would you like to sit down and be listened to? Okay. Don't do the big greeter energy. Keep it receptive energy, but you are welcome to invite folks. Okay. When you're listening, it's not total silence, but we've gone through the good listening skills. It's building rapport, it's relaxing you and the other person. It's staying open, non-judgmental, and it's really being curious about who this person is in heart and soul. And so you are going to reflect back. You are going to banter, but you're going to stay focused on their topics and convey empathy and compassion. Like, oh, sounds like that was a terrible day. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Oh, you sound really excited about that. That must have felt really good to you. It sounds like that felt really good to you, right? It's a lot of that reflection and head nodding and smiles and frowns, and it's that attuned response. I think there's this idea, because Maria Abramovich was one of the sort of tipping point inspirations for me, that I was advocating for us to just be silent, and that's not what I'm advocating for when you're actually listening. I am advocating for you letting the talker lead, okay? I want to talk a little bit about listening to people that are really, really different than you. If you don't feel safe, you don't have to listen to people, okay? But I do want to encourage you to stretch yourself, because there's nothing that delights me more than when someone that you would have never bumped elbows with in any other walk of your life, you actually get to hear their story and have a transformational experience yourself. That's been my experience, okay? But if someone makes you feel fundamentally unsafe, then you don't have to actually sit down. So what do you do if you're in a moment where we had some listeners that got chewed out, would be the word I would use. Somebody sat down and thought that they didn't like assumed they had some politics, that anybody that would engage in sidewalk talk must be from a particular political persuasion, and started screaming at them and cussing at them and getting in their face. Something like that happens. Or if you have someone that has that is aggressive in any way, first thing you want to do is politely ask them to leave, okay, one time. And if they get more heated, because we don't want to provoke, you need to walk away. So pack up your chair and walk around the corner and come back in 5 minutes, okay? Don't try to make it right with that person. If you've already asked them to back off in a kind but firm way, they're actually saying to you, I'm not able to actually calm myself down right now, or there's something about your presence that's so triggering to me that I'm not going to be able to engage in any sort of coherent way. So you actually are better served, and they are better served with what we call compassionate non-engagement. So pack up your stuff and move away, okay? What about folks that are a danger? So therapists ask this all the time. Well, we are not mandated reporters when we're out there on the streets because we are not actually operating as therapists. And for those folks who aren't therapists, mandated reporters means we actually have to mandate folks that are potentially dangerous if they could harm themselves or they could harm another person. Okay. It's good citizenry to be willing to report, though, if someone tells you they're going to harm themselves or someone else. But here's a really important distinction, okay? There are a lot of people that have suicidal thoughts, and it's very normal for them to have suicidal thoughts. Not everybody that's having suicidal thoughts is going to go out and kill themselves. And, I think this is something that as therapists we recognize, okay? So what you're going to actually want to know is, do they have a plan? Like, yes, I'm going to go do this today at 4. And do they have a way that they're planning on doing it? Do they have a means, right? So those are the things you're going to want to listen for. Do they have a plan, and do they have a means? And do they seem in a state where it seems likely? Okay. And then what do you do next? So this is why you need to bring out those emergency contact numbers. So in San Francisco, we have a psychiatric emergency team. So it's different than calling 911. It's a psychiatric team that will come out, and you call them and they'll come out and pick up the person and take them to the hospital. Okay. That has not happened once yet. I have certainly listened to folks that have told me that they are suicidal or have been suicidal. Okay. But when I listened to them, one of them had been in treatment for a while, or had been hospitalized and was out of the hospital. And another person said they'd had reoccurring thoughts for 7 years, but would never do it. So very different to me, not reportable. Okay. The fact that they felt safe enough to share that they get into this place where the feelings that they feel are so uncomfortable, they have fantasies of escape, means that our listening session is going really well. Okay. Topics don't come out that are that intense often, and I also think it's interesting. I notice that folks that are therapists that volunteer, we do get more intense topics because we do tend to lean into those deeper moments. So I don't want you to be too anxious. I really remember this is human interaction, and these people have been surviving many, many years without you. But as a listener, it might be the first time that they've been listened to in this way. And it's interesting, but the nervous system, it gets this first taste of actually feeling settled in and safe. And it might open the door for some of the unsafe feelings to come out. So that's kind of the magic of this project, is that it does unearth some feelings, right? Trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, so let's talk about time limits. So when you're listening, you're going to, in general, try to keep it to around 10 minutes. And everyone goes, well, what the heck how do you end that conversation if somebody's really getting into it? Well, you might start the conversation off by saying, hi, great, nice to meet you. So we have about 10 minutes today to sit down and talk. What would you like to talk to me about in 10 minutes? So that you're setting their expectations. Then as you notice that the time is kind of approaching, and you'll kind of ballpark it, there's no rules here, it's okay, but you're going to get that you're at that point and you're going to say, well, so we have about 1 minute left. What else feels really important to say before we say goodbye today? So that's my one-liner. And then when I'm really done, I say, who in your life listens to you like this? Or what was it like to be listened to today? That last one I really like. It's how I end a lot of my conversations. I touch people when I'm listening. I'm careful about it, but I've held people's hands while I was listening if it started to get intense. Dan Siegel, I was at a conference that's recently, and he was talking about how an attuned touch is sometimes as good as like 10 hours of listening. So if you're not comfortable with that, don't do it. But I want to say to you, if you are, and it doesn't feel creepy, it's okay to do that. I, in general, try to see if the person talking initiates it. I try not to initiate it. 95% of the time at the end of a listening session, the talker usually wants a hug. And I'm a hugger, so I'm happy to give them a hug. It's been really fun because I often still hug the people that I've gotten to listen to walking down the street. It's fun for me. That's it. That's it in a nutshell. So I think now's the time to do a quick, fast sort of run through and reminder. So you're going to have a pre-setup. You're going to want signs, your t-shirts, your chairs, a pen. You're going to want your emergency contacts. Some people have postcards. Bring postcards. You can write on the back of them. Okay. You're going to want to meet with your listener buddy or buddies ahead of time, or at least email ahead of time and get to know one another. Okay. The roles are listener and greeter. As the greeter, you get to choose between being big and boisterous or welcoming and calm. As the listener, you're going to be listening for safety. You don't have a duty to report, but you are going to want to follow the talker. Okay. We listen for about 10 minutes to each person. We stay out for about 2 hours, but you can extend it. You can listen as long as you want. And then at the end of the event, you're going to want to make sure that you clean everything up and pack everything in and take it home. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's pretty easy and low maintenance. After the event, especially if you're going to put on a bigger event, in San Francisco, after our big events, we get together and we all get some grub together. And it's really, that's the most fun part, because everybody feels so electric and alive. And then to come back together in community, you may choose to debrief with your listener buddy afterwards. Sometimes you're going to be, don't be surprised if you have one of the deepest sleeps you've ever had, because you'll probably be really tired after. So debriefing with your listener buddy can be a really good thing, or engaging in some lunch or some play. We may change the process and add a debrief component. I know the folks in Canada have debriefs after, but right now there's a time piece where folks really want to do their project and then get on with their day. But you may consider debriefing. And then finally, on the volunteer page, you'll see a link to the feedback. And every time you listen, I'd like you to get in the habit of coming and entering in your feedback, because what we're doing is we're tracking all of the data of how many people this project touches, so that we can get some grant money and potentially have an impact on certain policies around maybe how we teach listening, or different ideas. But we want to begin to measure what kind of impact we're having. So at the end of your day, after you've debriefed, after you've come back down, please come to the volunteer page again at the bottom and find the link that says volunteer feedback. Okay. Click there, and it's a really easy Google form, and it asks you what kind of people you listen to. It does ask you for some general stories. You don't have to go into details that feel like maybe it's gossiping about the person you listen to, but we do want to know some general themes so that we can actually be better equipped with listeners that have the skill set that may be needed in your location where you were that day. So that's it in a nutshell. I wanted to say that we hope that you will take this project and make it your own. You do not have to wait. This is a real grassroots project, so it's on you now to go out there and start listening. It's on you to really find your listener buddies, add your calendar event to the website, and just make it your own. If you need to find listener buddies, there is a private Sidewalk Talk Facebook group, and it's a place that you can connect with other listeners and find some. Or if you're in a city outside of the Bay Area, you're going to want to contact your city leader, or find some folks and tell them to sit through the training. Okay. Whew. Lots of talking. Thank you so much for doing this project, and I hope that you are as transformed by it as I've been transformed. I think that we can get caught up in this idea that we're giving to the community, but you receive a lot from this project. So I hope you let yourself receive too. And thank you very much. you.